Welcome everyone, this is my episode of Let's Talk. I'm super happy to be here today with Reuven Lerner. Reuven, how are you doing?
I am doing great, thanks. Nice to be here.
I've been meaning to do this podcast with you. I have a lot of questions. You're doing a lot of very interesting things. Maybe for the people who might not know you, could we start by a brief introduction on your side about who you are in a few words?
Sure. So today, right now, I am a full-time self-employed Python and Pandas instructor. So basically every day I work with both companies around the world training their people. People who don't know Python, I help them learn it. People who do know, I help them learn it better. And I also work with people around the world, like individuals. I have a lot of internet-based courses and newsletters and books to help them. But this is like, I've been in business for a long time, and this is sort of, I don't want to say the end of a long process, but my background is in computer science. I have a bachelor's of computer science from MIT, and then I did a PhD in education as well at Northwestern. And so it's nice that like everything has sort of come together, that now I can educate people about technology. And what can I say? I have a lot of fun. I feel very, very fortunate to have the work that I do.
That's amazing. I have a lot of questions regarding the PhD, the time at MIT, and all these years of teaching, learning, growing. An interesting journey. Maybe I always like to separate it in two parts. Before doing a retrospective of like key moments to help us understand the guideline of what you've been doing, I like to ask your state of the art. And what do I mean by that is, what are you currently trying to achieve, or like what is your goal, or what are you working on these days?
So the good news and bad news is that I do way too much at once. But it all falls under that rubric of I try to learn as much as possible, understand how it works, and then sort of feed it back to people in the form of classes, lectures, books, newsletters, posts, to help other people with their jobs and their careers. I'm just sort of like constantly curious about how different things work, and not just the technology, but also how technology affects society. So let's call it three things that I'm working on right now. One of them is just sort of beefing up my online courses for individuals. I get to meet all these incredible people from around the world who want to learn Python or improve their Python skills or their data skills. So I'm like going through a transition now with, I now have a subscription service to my system. I'm beefing up the courses there, doing lots of lectures for them. That's thing one. Thing two is that my Bamboo Weekly newsletter, which is all about basically asking new questions every week based on current events and open data. So it's like, how can we use these tools to learn about the world? And also, how can I pose questions that are going to give people exercises that are not boring and not toys that are like trivial. And the third thing is, and this is really in its infancy, I'm hoping to finalize it in the next month or two, is deeper learning exercises and projects. And this really both comes out of my education background and like how people learn best through doing things. And also my eldest, she's studying architecture. She said to me one day, like, why isn't all education done in projects? I said, you know what? You're right. I'm going to take this together. So I'm planning to launch project-based courses that'll give people very vague outlines, and then I'll accompany them over 4 to 6 weeks, helping them really to put together a project that they can be proud of and either use or just show off to other people.
Awesome. I have a lot of questions regarding education. Like just in general, thinking about education, what's wrong, what could be better. And you have a PhD on this, so I'm super keen to ask you about that. Just before we dive into all of this amazing word, and of course, we're going to talk about how Gen AI and those models can help you as a creator, like the creator sort of everything that you're doing is super interesting. Could we do a short retrospective of what you've been doing since MIT? Like, I don't know if you can comment a bit, like MIT, the PhD, and all the key milestones that you've seen. The idea behind that is just to have key moments that you can identify where you can share some insights, lessons that you've had through the past.
Sure. So look, the fact is, when I was at MIT, like it really did form me in many ways. Not just the sort of insane workload, not just the being exposed to ideas, but in many ways, they taught us not to focus on things like syntax, but to focus on really the deeper ideas. What's going on behind the scenes? Try to make sense of what's happening, because anyone can learn the syntax, but can you really see sort of the connections and the design decisions that were made there? The other thing that affected me there was I was the editor of the student newspaper, and that might not sound like it has any connection, but we managed to get ourselves some pretty sophisticated computer systems and eventually set up one of the earliest websites. And that sort of gave me insights into publishing online programs. And along the way, we decided we were going to use some programming language like Perl and Python that they were kind of new, but they were nice and high level and easier to work with, and low level stuff like C, which I didn't really know anyway. And so all these things have like accompanied me, these strands through my career. Um, but I really didn't know when I was in college, like, how does the work world work? I didn't know anyone who worked for a computer company. Like, I read about it in the newspaper. I'm a real news junkie. I always have been. So I was reading about computer companies and what they did and so forth, but actually working there, I don't know. So when I got a job at Hewlett Packard, it seemed like fun and it was interesting. I was working on medical products, and I felt good about what I was working on, even though it was with C and C++, which, oh boy, it's good for everyone, me and the rest of the world, but I no longer do that. Um, but I figured, okay, I'm working there, all will be good. And one day, everyone went out to a meeting except for two people, me and some other guy. I did not go to a meeting because I was a student. I was still interning there. And this other guy didn't go. I said, hey, why aren't you going? He said, oh, because I'm a consultant. I said, what's a consultant? He said, ho, it's the best ever. And so basically, while everyone else is at their meeting, I got instructed in how consulting works and how, like, I should aim to do this. Fast forward a few years, I moved from the US to Israel, and I decided to set up my own consulting agency. And that's what I've been doing ever since. And this guy, I wish I remembered his name, but he really inspired me and got me going. And I learned along the way that you can consult in anything, right? Like, you can be a sort of freelance programmer. But what I didn't realize is you can also be a freelance instructor. And so it took me a while to realize, oh, wait, I don't just have to do the programming. I can teach other people how to do that. And that's a career path in and of itself. And one that, again, has worked out very well. You can't do it if you're not also good at the programming, I'd say. But like, I had enough of those projects under my belt and enough both successes and disaster stories that I can amuse people with, that basically that led to what I'm doing. And so those were sort of the early milestones. And then sort of along the way, while I was here doing the consulting, milestones were just sort of sometimes, as I said, sometimes big success and say, wow, I really wish I could do more like this, but also sometimes failures. And I got tired of people coming to me and saying, we like the work you're doing, but the money ran out, or our company's going under, or the project ended, or bye-bye, like, we don't need you. And it just never felt like any project was coming to completion. And I was talking to a family friend about this, and he said, you know what you need to do? You need to get out of this for a little while, open your head to new ideas and find a new direction. You should do a PhD. Now, he was right about everything, except it took so long. It was an 11-year process. I do not recommend that to anyone. Mm-hmm. But it's true that taking some time off and rethinking and refitting, and even thinking, what do I want to study? And I could have done a computer science PhD, but I decided, no, I'm actually more interested in the intersection of technology and education. That's why I did something known as learning sciences. So again, this was like a big disruption in my life, but something that gave me a new direction. And now I can sort of apply all these ideas day to day. It also gives a little cachet when I'm like, talking to potential clients. Oh, you have a PhD. I know that means that, like, I got into a university and I finished and I managed to, like, please my advisor enough to finish. But people seem to think that like that's a check mark for accomplished person.
I know, right? Yeah, awesome. There are a lot of things that I would be curious to ask from this journey. It's been very interesting to see how you've went from the I do it for you to the I teach my knowledge so that you can do it yourself. Mm-hmm. And can you share a bit more, maybe before I dive into other questions, about the PhD and 11 years? So like, what were you doing during the PhD? Were you still doing consulting, projects, teaching? And what was the thesis of the PhD about?
Sure. So let's remember that many people, and this included myself, even when I was applying, many people think, oh, a PhD is just sort of more university. It's like you took some classes, you'll take more advanced classes, but that's not it at all. The purpose of a PhD is to teach you how to become a researcher. And you learn to be a researcher by basically doing an apprenticeship with someone else who is already an established researcher, meaning a professor somewhere. And so how do you learn it? You learn it by doing. So you take on a research project, and that is sort of interesting to you and interesting to your advisor. And finding that happy medium can sometimes be difficult. Now, in order to do that research, you usually need some basics. So the first 2 years of my PhD were spent doing coursework, just sort of learning more advanced stuff in education and research techniques and so forth. And then we had like an exam, really the only exam you have, which is just like to graduate to the next level. And then it's like, okay, go do your research project. Now, why did mine take so long? First of all, I decided to do something ambitious, which was creating a web application for people to collaboratively build and change simulations, computer-based simulations, using a technique known as agent-based modeling. So building that took a while, designing it took a while, getting users took a while, getting my advisor's buy-in took a while, figuring out how I would analyze the data took a while. Add to that the fact that I was indeed consulting on the side because we needed to eat and pay rent. And this was completely and utterly against the rules of the PhD program. So during the day, I would be there at the university doing my thing. And at night, I'd be hacking away, working for various clients, not teaching. Like I had one client in particular, but I had a few clients for whom I would be doing programming projects. So like that delayed it. So everything delayed it. Also, I'm married. I have kids. We had our third child while I was there doing the PhD. We decided to come back to Israel after a few years in America. So I was flying back and forth several times a year to hear from my advisor what a terrible student I was. And in addition to it all, my advisor, who is a brilliant, amazing researcher, wasn't the most helpful, encouraging, nurturing of advisors. So, there's one point which I had a deadline to turn in a draft of my dissertation. And I turned it into him. And 4 or 5 months later, I said, so what's going on? He said, oh my God, I haven't had a chance to read it yet. You're right. So he reads it, says, this is terrible. We cannot possibly graduate you with this quality of work. No. You'll have to rewrite it. I'm like, okay, can you give me some more feedback? So basically, every possible thing that could have delayed stuff did. And I basically managed to graduate because my project was a success. People even nowadays still use my research, my dissertation software every week. Hundreds of people, maybe thousands of people use it every week. And I think at a certain point, my advisor told the dean of the school, let this guy graduate. I'll take care of it. And he's doing me a favor. The dean was at my dissertation defense, and I'm convinced that was because she wanted to make sure I was really leaving and they were really rid of me after so long.
No way. I love that. Wow, that's very impressive. And wow. And okay, so this tool that it's like you built a startup while doing a PhD, while doing consulting.
So it's funny. Like after I'd finished, so just to give a little more depth, so my advisor's specialty is indeed in modeling, agent-based modeling, this kind of simulation building. Not just that you can use someone else's simulation, but you can build one yourself. And really, it's an easy-to-use programming language that lots and lots of people can do it. Even middle school, high school, university students can do it. So after I'd finished, after I put together this thing and allowed for collaboration and so forth, I found out that there was a group in Arizona doing a similar project, that they'd gotten millions of dollars in grant money from the U.S. government to do it. They had multiple full-time employees. And here I was slaving away on my thing for free as a grad student. And if we had just been a little smarter or more open-eyed, but oh well.
You would have raised 5 million. You would have said bye to your PhD. I don't need you guys.
That's right. I actually considered, by the way, continuing with my dissertation software and commercializing it. But I decided that the combination of the university's intellectual property rules, and they would be expecting to get money from this, and my advisor wanting to be involved, I was like, no, I'm going back to doing this.
Yeah, it took the
but
pass.
But
Whereas
I would say I'm also just not a good researcher. Like at the end of the day, for me, the fun part was building it. The fun part was
yeah,
like talking to people about it. But the
yeah,
real research was, okay, let's analyze the log files and see who was talking to whom. How often did
yeah,
people collaborate? How often did people interact in these different ways? And I can do it, but that's not my passion. And I'm not as good at other people at it. And so I'm happy, like the world needs researchers and the world needs support for researchers. And it's good that I am not one of them.
100%. And I relate to that. I prefer building and having like very like feedback very fast and just iterate than doing super advanced things, which are required and allows to get a lot of insights and the two combines very well. But I'm more in your team on that. Um well, you mentioned simulation and agents, and now we're in the day of agentic systems. And there are a lot of things being done. So, oh my god, I have too many.
No relationship.
But
I mean, I'm happy to talk about that, but like agent-based modeling has absolutely positively nothing to do with that, sadly.
I know, but I was curious if you could share like what's the idea behind it, and like how does it work, and maybe we can think of how it relates to how would you build that thing with today's tool? Because if you tell me it has like kind of agents or like simulation things, I believe that the latest models and agentic systems can allow you to do a lot of cool things in that thing. So I'm pretty sure you could implement those tools and like long chain and things like that to your PhD application. But maybe not. So can you share a bit more about how like what is it? How what is
Sure. So typically in a program, right, you say, I want to set this variable value to this, and I want to check this thing. I want to get these inputs and these outputs. And you are sort of controlling, directing what's happening in the program. In an agent-based model system, imagine you have one agent, and you basically tell the agent, here are the rules for how you're going to behave. If you see the following, if you get the following inputs, then you do X. If you get the other inputs, you do Y. So you give it like a rules. You can think of it as a rule-based system. Now expand that to not just one agent, but to dozens, hundreds, thousands of agents, and maybe even different types of agents. Then what you're going to do, so you can have, for example, doctors and patients, where patients are or people are spreading a disease through society, and the doctors like cure them at a certain rate, which is going to outpace those. So you're not explicitly giving ideas to each of these agents. It doesn't have anything to do with like AI agents doing anything. The idea is more like you're sort of giving instructions, and each of these independent entities is then following those instructions almost on its own, and you get to see the interactions. It's amazing for seeing what we call complex systems. So like birds flocking, fish schooling. My eldest, who I just mentioned, who's now studying architecture, so she was at the time in preschool, and we were living in Chicago, and come September, October, the leaves changed colors, and then they fell off the trees for autumn. And she said, why does that happen? So I built an agent-based model in which the leaves of a tree were the agents, and each of them had a different level of sugar and other chemicals. And as the sun shone and as the rain fell and as the wind blew, these chemicals would change, and each of the leaves would independently fall off the tree at different times, depending on their percentages. And you could then adjust the model. I want more sunshine. I want hotter weather. I want stronger wind. And you can see then how the simulation changes the outputs. That's the sort of agent-based model we were dealing with.
the wait? Do you have the visual part too? Like, do you see the tree as the leaves?
Yes. So the way that this modeling language works is it's not just behind the scenes computation, but you see it visually with color on the screen. It has a geometry, it has a geography, and it can really interact. It's a brilliant. I don't know if you're old enough, but do you remember a programming language for children
No.
called Logo? And Logo had a turtle on the screen. And the idea of a turtle was you could sort of tell it go forward, go backward, make a circle, make a square. So this is actually like the latest generation of Logo, where you don't have one turtle, you have potentially thousands or tens of thousands of turtles. And that visual part of it is indeed very powerful.
That's mind blowing. because I totally followed you on like you have all these inputs, you can put randomness into the systems and you control all of that. And then you launch your simulation. But I was thinking of okay, I'm just reviewing like the logs and what happens, but no, you have visual components inside of it.
Yeah.
Amazing. Cool. All right. So okay, I'll just jump to today and try to make some tangents. But you spent a lot of time learning yourself, doing yourself, and teaching. What did you get from MIT and from your PhD that helps you today? Like what do you use on a daily basis, or like what lessons um, did you capture or still serves you as of today in all the exciting projects that you're doing?
So one thing that I certainly learned from MIT was like sort of go fast. Right there. And so like many companies say to me, well, our people are very smart. And so we don't need an intro Python class. And it takes me a long time to convince them. I promise you, my intro class is not easy. It is not like, oh, here's a variable. Oh, here's an integer. It's way deeper. It's way faster than that. And that I 100% learned at MIT, where you would arrive at a course, right? And the first day, the professor would say, hi, everyone, welcome. Bam, and they're off and running, right? They're not going to waste time on like. And so when I did my PhD at Northwestern, is a fine university, but I remember the first day of class, we went and we all introduced ourselves as a small seminar. He says, "Okay, here's what we're going to be doing this semester. Any questions? Great, I'll see you next week." I thought, what? This is this apparently is standard at many universities where the first meeting is like kind of nice and introductory. Never, ever, ever at MIT was it like that. And so this idea of moving fast, challenging you, like, and so that also I learned for myself, challenge myself all the time. I'm kind of like, I had a meeting earlier, like about an hour ago, about the online boot camp that I do in Python and data analytics. And I said to the guy, I love it when people ask me questions. If they ask me a question that I know the answer to, that's great. If they ask me a question that I don't know the answer to, even better, because it forces me to learn. And so this intense desire to constantly be learning new things, to absorb it, and then to have it mesh with everything else I know, that was also something that was very, very much encouraged at MIT, of like, you want to learn as much as possible because you never know how it's going to fit together and how it's going to help you to get new insights. And so, yeah, like I definitely like, constantly, I've just been like, sort of running and learning. And it took me a while after getting married, after having kids, after having my family say enough already. Like I was really working all the time. And now, truth be told, one of the nice things about training is that I can calm down a little bit, that I don't have to worry about an infinite number of projects that other people are waiting to hear from me on. I can sort of be on an easier schedule, as it were.
Yeah, makes sense. Thanks. Okay, so those are. I really enjoy this culture of play hard. Like just go for it. Don't lose time. And of course, there are moments where like one needs to, I don't know, family, friends. Those moments are important, but on an introduction, I mean, I feel that I waste my time if I sit down 2 hours or like even like 20 minutes introduction class just to say hi. I don't know, just say hi in an email and or like send a video.
I mean, I'm not against people being nice. I'm not against people introducing themselves. I try to do the beginning of the course, right? I go around, and I'll tell you that also, that is for me one of the best sources of information for my business. When I go around a classroom and I ask people, what's your background? What are you here for? What do you want to learn? For me, that not only helps me change the course so it connects with them, I can make comments. I'm like, oh, for the person who comes from a Java background, you should know this works differently. And I'm not a Java expert, but I know enough to at least like point in those directions. So also though, if they say I'm here because I'm doing X or Y or Z, if I get enough people saying that, then I realize, oh, I should learn X or Y or Z. And indeed, that happened with me with data analytics. I played around with it a little bit, but people started saying in my intro Python courses, I'm here because Python is the language I want to learn so that I can analyze data. And we're using it here at the company. Finally, I realized, I'd better learn this and then I can offer it. And sure enough, that's now like one of my top selling things.
Yes. Makes total sense. All right, let me ask you about Python and about data analysis.
Sure.
Uh, so why why did you took that path? So I assume that you've done a lot of projects with Python. But yeah. So I'm super curious to know the relationship that you have with Python and with data analysis and with programming with this language because you went super deep with it. Um, so yeah, what's your relationship with this programming language?
So it's not as straightforward as many people think. Because like I've managed to, over the last number of years, sort of rebrand myself as like the Python training guy or a Python training guy. But as I mentioned, I learned Python back in early 1993 when I set up one of these early websites at the tech. And at the same time, I also learned Perl. And at the time, Python seemed very nice and I learned it and I knew how to use it. But Perl had more of a community to it and it was more sort of exciting and fun. And it was like where the cool kids were, like me. As I try to convince my children. In any event, so I really got into Perl and Python was always there sort of alongside things. And I did some projects in it and I taught people it. But most of my work day to day was in Perl. And it really sort of took the industry changing that I saw, okay, Perl is sort of going away. And then I really got into Ruby. And I was doing a lot of Ruby stuff for a while. And still, Python was always sort of accompanying me. I was doing things with it, but it wasn't the main thing. And basically what it came down to was, I want to guess about 20 years ago, something like that, maybe even more, someone said, while you're finishing your PhD, maybe you want to train through a training company and they can market you. And I spoke to the training company and I said, yeah, I teach a lot of Ruby. And they said, okay, fine, send us your CV. So I sent to them and they called me back and they said, wait, Python also? There's a ton of demand for Python. What are you talking about? So basically, that was the point at which I realized the market had shifted again. And Ruby, as much as it's a fun programming language, didn't have as much of a future. So I started doing Python and I've been doing that ever since. And it's funny, the things that I would tell people, because as I mentioned, I would work with Python, I would teach people Python, and I would tell people, if you're an adult and you want to learn a new programming language, Python is the one to do. Even if I wasn't using it day to day myself, I'd say it's straightforward, it's clear, it's concise, it's got a nice community. And now, years later, I've discovered that all of those qualities have made it the success that it is, that it's clear, it's concise, and has an amazing community. Really, the people I've met through the Python community are just extraordinary. It's super, super nice. I was just 2 months ago now. Wow, I can't believe so much time has passed. But 2 months ago, I went to Taiwan for PyCon Taiwan, and there were a few people there who I knew from other conferences around the world. And we're able to hang out and we're able to talk. And of course, we talk Python politics because what else are you going to talk? But basically, it's an amazing group of people that I've been privileged to get to know and to work with.
Wow. I feel that Python have so much depth, but it have the association of beginner level programming, Also, if I say, if someone says I can code with Python, it can either be on one side of the spectrum. I've done the 0 to Hero course on YouTube or on Udemy or whatever, and I can do things in a notebook, or I can build applications and go deep and use the asynchronous systems and build something super efficient and reliable. How do you convince people to do your introduction course in your companies, as it's not a 0 to Hero course? It's something different and you need it. How do you brand Python, or how do you change the conception of people's ideas about Python itself? Or do you feel, even though do you feel that thing about people see Python as a maybe easy programming, or they have some, I don't know, feel free to share anything.
So yeah, so there's several layers to that. First of all, when I started teaching Python in companies, when companies said we want to have you come in, there was a lot of resistance. People would be like, oh, this is a simple programming language, it doesn't really do that much, it doesn't have that much depth. And so my intro course is typically 4 days long, and usually about halfway through the second day, they would start to say, wait, you can do what? In how little code? Huh, this is more impressive than I thought. So it doesn't make it harder to learn, right? And they've always been taught that there's this equivalence between difficult to learn and serious programming language. And the Python approach is it can be easy to learn and still be a serious programming language, right? You don't need to separate these two ideas. So for a long time, that was sort of like, that would happen to me. I'd go into these companies and they would be almost fighting me until finally they said, oh, maybe it's not good for everything, but it's good for a lot of things. We should totally use this more. And that was sort of good for me and good for them also. I think that argument has mostly been made already. Like before I go into companies now, they've seen it. They are convinced. Python is everywhere. Everyone is learning it. It's the main language for data science and machine learning, and people know it. So it's no longer, oh, I've got to learn Python. It's more, oh, I have this opportunity to learn it. But now, right now we have the opposite problem, as you said, where people are like, oh, well, it's so easy. I don't need a class because I'm already a programmer. I don't need to learn Python. Like I could just pick it up, or I could go to Stack Overflow or ChatGPT or whatnot. And so my role is basically to show them you could do those things, but you're going to get a lot more out of the language. You're going to be more effective if someone sort of shows you the way and gives you some practice. It's the difference. Like I meet people who are working with Python for years and they've never taken a course in it. I mean, I guess I never took a course in it, so I'm one of those people, right? But I see people who have taken it for years and they just get by looking at Stack Overflow and ChatGPT. And I said to them, let's say you go to a foreign country. Would you rather be able to speak the language, or would you like to have to look in a phrase book for everything you want to say? Clearly, speaking the language is going to give you a better feeling, and you're going to be able to do more in less time. That's my role, to get you fluent or more fluent than you are, so that you can go and solve problems and not spend 3 days debugging the Stack Overflow answer that almost kind of but does not work.
Makes sense. I love it. I have a very simple question, but could you share like the layers of depth and difficulties that you can go through in Python? So like, do you have maybe ideas of, I can think of a lot of things. You mentioned like models, you have all these libraries, you can import, I don't know, NLP models. I'm not talking about anything related to GenAI. So then you have like, it's an object-oriented tool. So you have all the asynchronous functions that are interesting, but I'm sure that you have a lot of things on your mind. So if you were to take like from a entry level to the more complex, advanced things that you've seen, could you do maybe a list of things that you can think of?
Sure. So I think anyone who's using Python, and this is sort of where the low-hanging fruit is. I mentioned Logo before, by the way. So it was my advisor's advisor who created Logo, and he had the phrase for it that it's low floors and high ceilings, which means it's easy to get in on, but you're not limited by the language. This happened to be false for Logo, but it's true for Python, because in a day, you can already be assigning variables, understanding some basic types, calling, getting input from the user and printing things out. Just that, so you can sort of get up to speed with the basics pretty quickly. Learning those basic data types, integers, floats, strings, lists, tuples, dictionaries, maybe sets. If you can learn those are the most important building blocks in the language. And you can do a lot with just those. You don't need object-oriented programming. And then after those, then you learn functions, because not only do functions give you extra flexibility, they give you semantic power. You can basically define a new verb in the language and then never have to worry about all those little details. The example I sometimes use in my classes is, if you ask me what I had for breakfast this morning and I say I made an omelet, right? That one phrase, that one verb speaks volumes. But if I didn't have that verb, I would say I went to the pantry, I took out the eggs, I took out the pan, I took out the oil. Like I could bore you to death with all the details, but no one cares about those details. So you could shrink them and you can go up a layer of abstraction by defining a function. Same is true then for modules. Same is true for loops. The moment you have loops, you don't have to be explicit each time. You can just say, I want to do this 5 times, 10 times, once for each character in the string. You do that with functions, you can do that with modules. Once people have a sense then of what tools are available, then you can start talking about more advanced things like objects. And then you can start to talk to them about how these things interact. For example, the fact that functions are what we call first-class objects, that you can pass them as arguments to other functions, that you can return them from functions. So that gives you all sorts of additional functionality. It means that you can then talk about things like iterators, things like generators, things like decorators that you don't need on a day-to-day basis, but boy, oh boy, do they make things easier, right? It's like, we got a new car, I guess, like at the beginning of the year, and it had cruise control on it. Now I'm going to sound like a Luddite. I'd never used cruise control before, right? Suddenly on the highway, I use it. I'm like, oh my God, where was I all these years, right? So it's tools like that in Python that once you discover decorators, like, wow, what an amazing thing. And then you can go into different directions. You go deeper into objects, deeper into functions. You could say, I don't need to go deeper into objects or functions. I want to learn how to analyze data, or I want to create network applications, or I want to go do concurrency. And all of these paths are legitimate. And the more of them you know, the more problems you can solve. You have more tools in your toolbox.
Well, thank you very much. I really enjoyed this following these different levels in a very structured way. I think my main questions for you right now would be, so I have three things that I'm super curious about. The first one is a follow-up question on Python itself. The second one is the book that you wrote on Python. And the third one is how do you see learning today, and how do you see it evolving? Like, how do you see Python in the future, and how do you approach? Because I want to touch on your community and what you're doing. And so very shortly, you've built a lot of things. And so if I go back to your PhD application, I would assume that it was written in Python.
It was not. It was written in Ruby because at the time I had more experience doing web applications in Ruby than in Python, so I used Ruby on Rails. Also, the data analysis that I did it in R, not in Python. If I were doing it all today, I would definitely use Python for the web app, and I would definitely use Python and Pandas for the analysis. But I finished more than 10 years ago. I finished I'm looking up. Finished exactly 10 years ago. So the research was, I just looked up here. So it's like December of 2014. They gave me my diploma somehow or other. And so like the research was going for, call it something like 10 years, a little less than that. And so 20 years ago, the main web app, like you could do it in Django, and you could use Python for the numeric analysis, but why would you do that? Like the tools were just sort of more exciting and better formed in other languages.
Makes sense. Right. Just a quick question about that.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
It was no, sorry. I was just curious. If you had to build something from scratch today, like a web application, I don't know, for your community or something, like what would be your tech stack? Would it be Django? Would you be Flask? Would you deploy in AWS, on Azure, or like, do you have kind of ideas? And I know that these questions is bad because it really depends on the use case itself, and it depends on what you want to achieve. But I don't know. Right. If you have some insights, I take it.
The real answer is I don't know, because like it depends. But I'll tell you, first of all, I love PostgreSQL as a database. I've used it for so many years. It is like, I tell people there's this parallel universe in which I'm not a Python instructor, but rather I'm a Postgres instructor. That I taught Postgres for a number of years. And at a certain point, I just had to sort of decide. I couldn't do everything for everyone all the time. But the Postgres developers are so good and so smart and so attuned to their community, and they just keep knocking it out of the park. They're doing amazing stuff. Would I use Django or Flask? My guess is I would probably use some Flask. But it's sort of like the two have different approaches, right? Where Flask is, let's have a minimal framework and you add what you need. And Django is, let's give you a ton of stuff that has a higher, sort of steeper learning curve, and you choose which parts you want. I'm guessing I would probably go with Flask, but I can easily imagine going with Django also. I don't know for sure. And on the JavaScript side, I honestly have no idea whatsoever. And on the hosting side, I have no idea whatsoever either. Probably like I'm kind of old school in that I set up a server I set up like, Apache or Nginx or something like that. And that's usually enough. Or would I go to some, like, I probably would use some like existing hosting system. Also, nothing I do is going to need to scale so massively, right? Like the biggest thing I had to deal with ever was, so you're obviously familiar with Airbnb. It's not the only home rental place. And for about 10 years, I worked with a home rental place called Rent Like a Champion. And this is a uniquely American phenomenon that basically a lot of universities in America have sports teams, and the alumni come back to watch the games, especially American football games. Well, where are they going to stay? These campuses are not in major metropolitan areas, so people rent out their homes. And Rent Like a Champion basically says, here, like, we will give you the game schedule of your favorite university, and then we will find you homes that you can rent Airbnb style in that city, in that location. So I helped them with their technical stuff, and the company actually was on the Shark Tank TV show. I got an investment from some people there. We knew months in advance that we were going to be on Shark Tank, and we knew that we were going to get hit with a ton of traffic when it hit television. So we spent a good number of months scaling up, like getting multiple servers and redundancy and on and on and on. In the end, like, we passed with flying colors. It was fine. But that was like the biggest thing I ever worked on. And let's be honest, even then, it wasn't that many servers. It really was not.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this is an excellent point, because a lot of time there is a common point where it's like, but what about scaling?
Oh my God.
And like, what is there to scale? Like some scaling things that don't need it.
So really, so the beginning of my consulting career, I did a lot of web applications for people, and they would constantly be asking me, well, can I handle our traffic? And I would say, okay, like, how many people come to your website a month? And they were like, oh, we have a lot of visitors, at least 1,000. I'd say 1,000 an hour? No, 1,000 a month. And I would say, okay, here's what you're going to do. You're going to go to the local computer store, and you're going to ask them what computer is covered with spider webs in the back that they have not been able to sell in several years. That is your server, because it is more than adequate for 1,000 people a month. And they'd be like, really, you sure it will be able to handle that? I'm like, I promise you, it will be able to handle that. But right, people have no idea of how this stuff works or how to scale it out. Or how unnecessary. Like, that's not your major concern. First, have the success, right? Then worry about the scaling.
100%. Yeah, I love it. Very fun. Awesome. Okay, so my two last question, I think. The first one is Python workout and Pandas workout. You mentioned at the beginning that you're more than ever switching your learning systems to real use cases, real implementation of projects, which kind of relate. So can you tell us a little bit about those two books, and like, why did you write them? Maybe share a bit about the community, everything that you have, like, how do they fit there? And then I'll ask you about the learning part and how you're rethinking the way we can learn and process these informations.
Sure. So the books were written. So I started with Python Workout, and that book I actually like. So basically, my students would ask me in my corporate training. We would finish the class, and they'd say, "Okay, what now?" And I'd say, "Well, you probably should practice." They'd say, "Where should we practice?" And I thought, "Oh, this is an opportunity." So I took my favorite, best exercises for my courses, made up a bunch of others that were along the same lines, and I put it together as an online book. Several publishers approached me to publish the book, and I said, no, I don't need you. I am going to succeed publishing it on my own. And then a few years later, I said, you know what? Maybe they actually know what they're doing in terms of publishing and selling. So I went back to Manning, and they said, yes, we'd be very happy still to talk to you about the book. We published Python Workout. I actually owe them now an outline for a revised edition. We're going to do a second edition. It'll be some light revisions, nothing major, but like there's some changes to language that are worth mentioning. And as soon as that book was done, we started talking about what would be my next book. And I'd already self-published a book of regular expression exercises in a similar way. But I learned people hate regular expressions. People hate regular expressions. And so I said,
Magic.
listen, there's no way that like this will not sell. People will burn this book. People will not buy this book. And so we discussed what the next book should be. And I said, well, what about pandas? So we agreed, and that was the genesis of Pandas workout. And similarly, I took many of the exercises I'd done in class. I added a bunch of other exercises that were along those same lines that since then I've used in classes. And that was Pandas workout. And we actually have talked a little bit about doing one in SQL as well. That would be along the same lines. We'll see. First, we're going to do Python workout, second edition. I'm talking to O'Reilly about doing an intro Python book, basically like along the lines of my non-programmers courses that I've been teaching for years. We'll see exactly sort of what I do for whom when, but that's sort of the genesis of the book. And I love doing exercises. Like I love coming up with them. I love thinking about them pedagogically. I love seeing where people struggle and seeing how the struggling can actually lead to, learning. I call that controlled frustration. I say basically it's frustrating and you're going to sweat and you're going to be annoyed and maybe you won't get it, but it's way better to have that happen when you're trying to solve exercises in a book or in a course than to have it with your boss breathing down your neck saying, hey, when is this going to work?
Mm, amazing. Awesome. I would be curious to ask you about Panda. Panda in itself could be a 1 hour episode, I guess. Panda in itself could be fun. Okay, but maybe except if you want to add something, and I'll do another end question to review if I missed anything that you think could be very relevant to share. But how do you view training and learning changing for the years to come? And I'm not only referring like with all the latest technology and Gen AI and so on, which of course is going to have an impact. How, like what kind of impact? I'm not sure. It's kind of like the first internet pages. No one knew that we would have SEO and we would do like super advanced things afterward. But what's your insight, or how do you see the field shapes in the upcoming years?
I don't know, but we're starting to see these changes happen. We're starting to see like big changes. So like when people would ask me what I was studying my PhD, I would tell them I'm in a program in learning sciences. They'd say, well, what is that? I would say, bottom line, the program is all about, we have learned a lot about the human mind in the last 100 years, and we've created a lot of technology in the last 100 years. Why then are we still teaching the same way as we did 100 years ago? Shouldn't we be changing something somewhere? And the sad, frustrating answer was that people came out of learning sciences and did not really change much. I think for all the work that went into that research, LLMs are blowing it out of the water. That suddenly we have a technology that is able to accomplish a lot of the things that we were sort of hoping for, talking about, and it just like came out of nowhere or seemingly out of nowhere. So I am optimistic overall, but I think people are going to have to learn how to learn with it. So first of all, it drives me bananas when people say, well, I don't need to learn to program now. I'll just ask ChatGPT to program for me. I'm like, okay, there's so many problems with that. Like, two of the problems are, one, it gets it wrong. And two, the odds of you being able to specify your problem clearly enough in English to get the program you want, basically the odds are zero. And indeed, I remember when ChatGPT came out, people were saying, it was this great phrase, the hottest new programming language is English. Because now you'll just tell the LLM what you want and it'll come out with a program. You don't need to program anymore. This is clearly nonsense. So I tell people, if you want, though, run your plan through ChatGPT. Like before you start programming, ask it what it thinks about your sort of plan process. And when you're done, use it for a technical review. So you want it to be your pair programming buddy. You want it to be your brainstorming buddy, but it's not your expert. And sometimes it can come with brilliant stuff. Just yesterday in doing Bamboo Weekly, like I said, I really like to do such and such. What's a good way to do it? And it gave me a way to do it. And I looked into it. I found out, no, that's actually deprecated. It's a bad way to do it. So I go back to it. I challenge it. That's why I tell people also, you want to challenge the LLM. You want to put it in a corner, like make it know who's boss. Well, okay, that's a little much, but basically, like if you are asking the questions and see it as an alternative way to search the world's documentation, that's the way to use it. And so I use it all the time for learning new stuff. I call this the reverse Socratic method. That instead of the teacher asking you lots of questions to learn, you are asking the LLM lots of things. And the more questions you ask it, the more insights you get, and the more you discover where its holes are. So I think this is where learning is going. I do this myself hours every week, all the time. But I also can evaluate its answers because I have experience. And my worry is that we're going to enter this age where people use the LLMs to do programming for them, don't get the experience on their own. And then what happens to them when they're senior engineers? It's going to be a problem. So I want people to get that experience. And that comes down to actually doing the work yourself, means the sweating of doing exercises and practicing. And it'll take longer, but I think it'll be worth it.
Awesome. Yeah, there are many points that I really enjoy. I really like the reverse Socratic method. I'll steal that from you. I really like it. And yeah, I think it comes to how good are you into reasoning and prompting? How good are you at challenging it, at trying to think? So like, I think if your first goal is to think and understand, you're going to have an amazing time with those models, because you'll just be, okay, I'm thinking about doing this application and I'm thinking about that. Can you help me think it through? Okay, but doesn't this is relevant? Or maybe like if I don't have the expertise to go to the senior level that you mentioned, right? But so it's a problem, right? But I'm a junior, so I'm not sure about what do I need to take into account regarding this problem. Can you give me a list of the important things that I need to think of?
Yeah.
Then it will tell it to you. And then you say, okay, but based on the list that you just shared me, can you review what you did before? And then you will do it. And then you say, and then a lot of moments. So I love this. And it impresses me how people just give up on the prompting side. And I feel that there is a huge learning curve in how curious are you? And I'm all into it's just crazy how impressive the learnings are when we do things, like we build something, like we just have hands-on and we understand something, we implement it, done. It's like bike. I just remember how I ride a bike for all my life. So I really love this, and I'm super excited about the opportunities in the learning ecosystem. But that's for another episode. So this is my last question for you. First of all, Reuven, thank you very much for coming on the show. I had an amazing time, and your journey is super impressive, and I look forward to learn more Python with you, of course. And my last question to you is, where can everyone learn more about you, your courses, your books, and everything like that? And if you have a final touch, I'll ask you after that.
Sure. So the main site that I send people to now is learnerpython.com. That's where my courses are. You can learn sort of more about what I offer. I have links there also for my books and my corporate training and my newsletters. And if I don't have them yet, I will set them up. I'm pretty sure I have. It's all a work in progress, right? But like learnerpython.com is where I've been focusing most of my attention. They can also look for me on LinkedIn, on Blue Sky. I've been getting increasingly active there. I have a YouTube channel that if people are interested in Python and Pandas, I put up a new video about once a week. And I just walk you through basically using the same techniques as I do when I'm teaching. I don't use slides. I just type into Jupyter. I talk while I'm typing, and I help you sort of learn and uncover some of these connections between things. But I love hearing from people around the world. I love hearing like what issues people have, what challenges they have. So really, people should not be embarrassed to reach out to me on social media, and say hi. It's. I'll add also, I mean, I mentioned before that I feel extremely lucky to enjoy my work. I know that not everyone does, but I'd like to think and hope that having a tool like Python or skills like data analysis can give you more flexibility and a greater chance at a job where you'll feel happy, fulfilled, and satisfied, and not say, oh, I got to go in there again, like just to sort of, pay for food. So, I can't do everything. I don't have a magic wand, but if I can help give you skills that will make you, give you a better career and a better life, that's very fulfilling to me for sure.
Hmm. And just the passions that you share about this programming language and the way you can approach programming in general and building things, I think does a lot of this. Uh,
Let me just add one more thing, by the way, which is there's so many people, maybe not people listening to this, but there's so many people out there who are convinced I cannot program, right? It's too hard for me. It's too frustrating. And I tell you, you can do it. It's a long journey. It's frustrating. It is exactly like learning a foreign language. So you have to be ready to laugh at yourself. You have to be ready to make stupid mistakes. But as with a language, little by little by little, you will do it, you will make it, and you'll have this profound sense of satisfaction.
Amazing. I'll I'll program you right after that. I'll do some code. Amazing. Well, Reuven, thank you very much. Like I said, it was an amazing time having you on the show. And I wish you to have an amazing day. Thank you again.
Thanks, Thomas. Pleasure being here.